Idahoans are very used to things that are vast. We have a large state, we have vast spaces, our lands are vastly varied. We have everything from mountains to deserts here in Idaho, and we have a huge diversity in terms of the way that our elections landscape likewise is laid out. And that's some of the things that we're going to just touch base on here as we open this conference. You know, in Idaho, we have 44 counties, the smallest of which has just under 400 registered electors in that county. On the other end of the spectrum, Ada County, our largest populated county, is 266,000 registered voters. So we operate within a spectrum there that obviously is vastly differentiated. Our county's processes are tremendously differentiated. Under the bottom-up federated system that we utilize here in Idaho to handle elections, the 44 different counties, we like to say, come in about 38 different flavors. We have everything from hand count counties to counties that use precinct-based tabulation optical scan systems from multiple vendors to counties that utilize central count tabulation systems and varying levels of those optical scanning devices as well. And then finally, over the course of the last years, we've seen even a new vast difference in how elections are handled. So when the secretary came into office for his first term, one of the first things he did was an evaluation of the existing infrastructure and the existing system. As we looked at that, we found things that were tremendously out of date. We had architecture and IT infrastructure that was not up to current standards, and we began the process of looking at how that was going to change and what those processes were going to be, starting from the, let's call it the most deprecated versions, and getting on now to where we're starting to deal with the election system, which of all of the pieces in 2016 as a system that was brought in 2006 was actually the most modern at that point in time. So that gives you an idea of some of the differences that were in play there. From 2016 to today, we've seen a vast difference. When we came in 2016, we had Windows NT boxes that were operating. We had our most modern servers were Windows 2003 servers, and there were systems in our overall architecture that had not been updated for over 6 years because there was no update or upgrade path to the architecture on which they were built. Today, we are literally weeks from launching an entirely cloud-based migration, where by the end of the month of June, coming into July, we will have an entirely cloud-based operation in partnership with Microsoft and their both .gov and Microsoft Cloud hosting environments. So tremendous differentiation in the systems that we're utilizing across all platforms. Now, what that outlines is the simple fact that in today's elections environment, there's only one certainty, and that certainty is change. To give an example of this, let's take a look at the very close in terms of time elections that happened both in March 10th of this year, the Idaho presidential preference primary, and the May 19th statewide primary that we just completed only days ago. On March 10th, 228,513 Idahoans cast their votes in the presidential primary for one of 3 party primaries that happened on that date. Of those 228,000, approximately 28,000 of those votes were cast by absentee ballot. Now, in the days that shortly followed that, we started seeing an uptick in the coronavirus response around the country, and especially here in Idaho. And shortly after that March 10th date, the governor of Idaho declared that the Idaho primary would happen exclusively by absentee ballot. The number of days between March 10th and May 19th is 70 days. There was information put out that if you're going to migrate to a mail ballot type of election system, the proper timeline to do so is somewhere between 6 to 9 months. We had 70 days. In that 70-day window, by May 19th, 430,000 Idahoans had requested their absentee ballot. Of those 430,000, 334,724 went on to cast that ballot in our first 100% absentee ballot election. Now, the 100% absentee ballot election in and of itself is monumental, but if you consider the fact that over 100,000 additional electors actually participated in the election in a completely separate process, and a process which represented over 1,600% growth in absentee ballots mailed out by the counties, you have the picture of change that our 44 counties and their election staffs had to undertake. Tremendous effort. It shows the extent to which Idaho's elections personnel in all 44 counties will go to in order to make sure that a fair election can be held. Now, in doing that, obviously there is a tremendous challenge that lays in it. So today you're going to be looking at cyber safety, and that is a critical component. We've been working on training our 44 county clerks now for 2 going on 3 years. Our first major event was back January 2 years ago, where we held a full-day cybersecurity simulation exercise here in Boise. We brought all 44 clerks in. We partnered with the Harvard Defending Digital Democracy Project to bring that event to Boise, Idaho, again, partnering with Boise State University in that process. A year later, we repeated that event utilizing different practices and trying different exercises, and we continue to do that. In fact, Idaho has just made a commitment to do that for the next 4 years, utilizing some of our Help America Vote Act funding to make sure that we continue to press and train Idaho's 44 counties on the cyber safety side of this entire endeavor. You're also going to be taking a look today at misinformation and disinformation. And within that space, we're living in a completely different era today. We live in an era where fact and opinion, the line between the two, are continuously blurring. Social media has the opportunity to put information out and see it and have it perceived as fact with little to no verification. And because of that, we have to be tremendously cautious, not only about what we follow and don't follow, but also what we repeat or what we respond to and how we respond to those different pieces of information. We need channels by which we can actually verify that information. And when we find information that's not valid, we need channels to be able to try and address it. Now, I'm proud to say that Idaho has been part of working with the National Association of State Election Directors and with the National Association of Secretaries of State, as well as CISA and the ISACs, to create a channel by which all secretaries of state can correct and directly interact with social media organizations to get information adjusted. Now, Idaho a couple of years ago found a Google ad, for example, on election day that looked like the Idaho Secretary of State was endorsing a particular ballot initiative. We were able to contact through our NASED contact, get in touch with Google and have that information taken down and that ad removed from Google's search engines within a matter of hours. So that's a tremendous difference, and I look forward to hearing what we see in that space. And then finally, crisis communications. I think it's very appropriate that this system or that this seminar that you're in today is supported by Google. As part of our work with D3P and Harvard, we have also had an opportunity to interact with Google and Google engineers. And I'm happy to say that Idaho will be working towards developing and further developing a Google-Microsoft joint venture project that was done with D3P in a crisis communication tool, and that work will be coming here to Boise State University in Boise as we continue to develop that tool and try and deploy it out, testing it first here in Idaho and then making it available to states around the United States. So finally, kind of to wrap up on just some opening commentary, the things that you're going to learn today, if there's one thing that you take away from today, it's something that we've had to learn here in our office. And it is start to find within the cybersecurity space a confidence in the fact that you really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We need to become more confident that the things in which we would say we are confident, we should have less confidence in. That's one of the first indicators. As soon as we think that we've got something under control, we start to question ourselves. And when we find ourselves in those environments, that's an opportunity for us to go out and try and look for new angles, new processes, because the one thing that is absolutely certain is that change is inevitable. And even in elections where we like to use standards, where we like to use processes that have been well established, the Australian ballot system that the Idaho Constitution puts in for a secret ballot, that's been around in the United States since the early 1880s. And it's something that hasn't really tremendously changed in almost 120, 130 years. That's a system that's going to have to be looked at in order to be maintained. We can't just have confidence that what we've done before is going to work tomorrow. So I'm excited to see what today brings with the different speakers that have got their information to present. And thank you on behalf of the state of Idaho for being here. Is our voter registration database moving to the cloud? And the answer to that is broader than just that question itself. The fast answer to that is yes. The entirety of the hosted and managed election systems for the state of Idaho will be moving to the cloud, but that's a broad range. So I want to differentiate some of what those are. First, at the very forefront of what we've got for elections, we have the Secretary of State's website. Now, sos.idaho.gov and the elections pages therein, that's the most visible thing that consumers see, that citizens see when they go to get elections information. So as was mentioned, if you were to see the front page of the SOS defaced on an election day and that information said the election was canceled, that would obviously have significant implications on the election in the state of Idaho, while it would have absolutely nothing to do with the actual state voter registration database, because the two systems and that data are in completely different locations. So we consider that both a consumer front, it's what we call a low risk, meaning that it is public information. It's our website. We can change it quickly. We can run a backup on it quickly and have that back up, but we still consider it a cybersecurity risk. We do, however, because it's static public information, we leave that in an environment that's just a standard, what we call a standard cloud environment, and we put security measures on it that are appropriate. Then we go to a moderate level risk. So if we look at, for example, the campaign finance information, that information is submitted by an individual through a consumer front end, but that individual has a login. So because we have an actual login, an actual access to a backend, we have a higher level of risk, a higher level of security, and that goes in a different environment. Then we move clear to the other end of the spectrum, and that's, for example, the voter registration database itself. That information, highly critical. It's not all public information. It may have some PII in there mixed with public information as well. But that's what we call a back-end piece, and that back-end information, completely different environment. We go under what are called FedRAMP standards at that point, which is the same standards that are utilized by tax, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. We have different standards that we operate in that space. So yes, the information is all going to the cloud, but as you just heard with authentication, we go under, at our strongest levels, we go into what we call a zero trust approach, which means the authentication is so rigid getting into those back-end pieces where you have administrative capability, or maybe the ability to add a new user, for example, that would then have access to things administratively. Those are very tight. We use multiple, not just two-factor authentication as you saw, but multiple other techniques as well. We don't disclose what those are because that's part of our security profile. But just understand that those are both significantly reviewed, significantly monitored. We layer multiple services in there, and then we test those very diligently, both with internal and external third-party companies testing against those for vulnerabilities. And that is simply training and actually drilling those things is absolutely critical, and something that we've definitely done here in the state capitol and then out at our counties as well. But as was said very well by a 19th century Prussian commander, paraphrased by a lot of our military personnel, no battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. Now we've dumbed that down quite a bit, but make no mistake, this is a battle that we are in, and contact with the enemy is constant. There's a tremendous book out by a 4-star Army general, retired 2010, but in 2004, He took command of Joint Special Operations Task Force going after Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that gentleman, General Stanley McChrystal, wrote a book called Team of Teams. And in Team of Teams, he talks about the fact that they went from a complicated model in warfare where you have many parts and predictable cause and effect from complicated to a complex model. And that complex model, still many parts, but it's really hard to find that predictability, that cause and effect that's very linear. And that's really what this environment is that we're having to actually effectuate elections in today. Is it's a very complex model that borders, as you've heard multiple times today, on the third part of that shaping model, which is chaotic. And in chaotic, you have no evident cause and effect. Things can happen for seemingly random reasons. So when you've got an environment like that, you've got to be trained, you've got to have a plan, and then you've got to be agile enough to pivot off that plan, move away, and have a backup plan in place. And that's really a big part of what Team of Teams talks about. It's how they change the way they manage special operations forces in that battle against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So really good book and something to take a look at, especially if you enjoy military strategy. But it can definitely be applied in the environment that we find ourselves in today.